Hi, I'm Michelle Olivier, and you're listening to Hey, I Want Your Job, the podcast that looks at amazing jobs and what it takes to get them. Hi, and welcome to Hey, I Want Your Job. And this this week we actually have Ryan with us, and I have to say, this is one of the few times I genuinely, the first time you told me what your job was, I was like, oh my God, I want that job. So I can't tell you how excited I have been to have you on the show. So we're going to start with the easy stuff, and then we'll get to the part that's probably really sexy for me, and I'm not sure how many other listeners are going to find it as exciting, but I am totally going to nerd out about everything that you do. So what is your job title?
My job title is Associate Director of Learning Analytics at PPD.
Okay. And what does that do?
Essentially, I lead a department that is in charge of determining the efficacy of all learning across PPD. So being in the pharmaceutical industry, we do a lot of training that's all regulated by the FDA and other regulatory agencies. So I'm making sure that all that investment into that training is the right investment, and we're maximizing that and getting the most out of it.
So here is why I geek out so hard about your job. Your job, just so that you know, for HR people, is one of these jobs that we know exists. We know that you are out there, but all of the other HR people I have spoken to, of which I know many, have all agreed that we knew your job existed, but none of us had known anybody who had it before. You're like the NSA of HR in a way.
So, yeah. I mean, you hear it merges in with talent analytics a lot and people analytics. So it's kind of a subset of talent analytics, I like to say. So
how did it come to be that you were the NSA of learning and development? How did you find yourself in this position?
Well, I think it all started back when I went into learning back in, I think, about 2004. I worked at Dell in the department that dealt with all of the escalations that got to Michael Dell and the other executives. So we handled the, technical side of any big account escalations, and they wanted to grow this team across the world. And so they said, we need somebody to kind of develop training around what the heck we do here, right? They picked me, and that was the beginning of how I got involved in training. And that kind of led to, after I did the curriculum build out of that department, the training department said, hey, come over to our side. And that's what I did. So I went over to the training department, and kind of the rest is history. I've done all of the roles in training in the subsequent years up until about, gosh, when was it? 2011, I think. I was in training ops essentially, and we were doing lots of reporting and kind of looking at Kirkpatrick and different ways of determining the value of training. We had a big training budget at Dell, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And just they started asking about, well, how do we measure the ROI of this stuff? And we had brought in a director at the time who had an education doctorate and who had worked on that as part of her dissertation. And that really kind of got me into learning analytics. And I led the program in Dell Services, and we had about 140,000 learners there. And, we did about 4,000 or 5,000 instructor-led training sessions per quarter, a lot of training. And it was just me, one person, leveraging kind of like this training evaluation system that we purchased. And I learned a lot the hard way there. And at some point, one of my colleagues had left Dell and went over to this company called PPD, and he asked me, hey, they really want to do here what you've done there. Would you like to come over? I'd been at Dell 12 years at that point, and I thought, I'll take the plunge. I need to change. So,
That is so I for a long time as part of my recruitment life, I did training and I worked with the largest recruitment company in the world and I developed and delivered training for them. And so I do know a little bit about this space from a hands-on perspective of knowing that efficacy in training is, I mean, that's like figuring if you can figure out the magic formula for how to have training that actually works, like that's living the dream right there. And most evaluation systems for training suck. We had the ever popular smile sheets. It's like, was it sad face training or was it, elated face with horns and whistles? And none of that has anything to do with efficacy. That's just how did I feel today? And did I like my trainer? Was the candy good? You know what I mean? So talk to me about what you've learned that actually the great truths of what makes training efficient.
Well, efficient is one thing. Efficient is really about getting the right people trained at the right time.
Okay.
Right? You forget what you've learned in 7 days.
Okay.
And actually in 7 days, you've forgotten 80%. So you start forgetting as soon as you leave training or as soon as you click the close button in your learning management system. So it's really just efficiency comes from making sure you've got like we like to say, the right content, getting to the right people at the right time.
Okay, that makes sense. Up,
you've got efficient training. Kind of effective training really goes back to your planning in the beginning and partnership with the stakeholders that are saying, we have a problem, we feel training is the solution. And you have to first well, is training the solution? Like,
right.
Or are you just training people?
We have a problem that all of our people are really mouthy and we feel like some communication training is the way to fix it. I've had so many managers try to fix me with communication and assertiveness training. I am unfixable, as it turns out, Ryan. Some things are just, your character. So, so how do you determine something that is fixable with training?
Well, you kind of take a performance consulting approach and look at all of the factors that could be affecting the behavior. And you want to make sure that that behavior is measured somehow. If you have this behavior you feel is incorrect and you feel it's a knowledge or skill gap contributing to that behavior, and we go in and we want to look at, well, what else is affecting that behavior? Is it an incentive? Is it a process? Is it some other initiative this is the fallout?
Sure.
And looking at the whole picture and then validating whether or not there really is a knowledge or skill gap. It could just be that they need to throw out a competition with $100 gift cards and they'll fix their problem, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, and that's so interesting to hear because I guess that's very much the system that I'm used to. Like there's a lot of meetings, there's a lot of hand holding of, hey, maybe you should just be a better manager, or maybe you should hire different kinds of people that are less mouthy. I don't know. And it's just very consultative. And I guess I'm both heartened and disappointed that there isn't some magical technical solution where you can type 5 factors in and it hoocha, here's the correct answer to solving that issue in your team. I was hoping you had some secret talent management software program that you had developed or utilized.
It's just classic performance consulting and, making sure you've asked all the right questions. I mean, when you do it over and over again, it becomes second nature. And, I did that for a while in my career before I ended up in learning operations. But, it's kind of going back to those roots of, going through performance consulting and taking a good, human performance improvement approach to the problem and getting really good partnership with their stakeholders, making sure they're committed to it, making sure they know how to define the problem. They have a way to define the problem. And often what we do that I think a lot of groups don't do, if they aren't able to define the problem, I mean, I've got a measurement team. I come in and say, okay, well, here's some pro bono business intelligence. We're going to just build these metrics out for you. so we can clearly define that problem and get a baseline. So, you know, we take that approach, and then going through a really good, you know, if it is identified as a training solution or part of the solution needs to be training, take a really good design approach, making sure you don't only design for transferring the learning, but also, you know, we take into account all of the, you know, the last 30 years of research around training effectiveness
Yeah.
and make sure there's that big, all that support around the time of application. So the managers know how to reinforce it, because, you know, research shows that managers are the number one differentiator on people successfully applying learning on the job and it's sticking long term. Making sure you've got the managers engaged, that there's adequate time and resources, and they've got notes and cheat sheets available to them, you know, when it's time for them to apply it, and incentives in place for good application, and you know, lots of gamification type tools make it, that works great, right? You know, make leaderboards and badges and things like that, all kinds of things to make it fun. And you know, I like to kind of follow the Kirkpatrick approach of, you know, making sure that you're supporting and reinforcing and monitoring. You're checking all those boxes.
So
And that is the training design. It's not just the hour they spend in training or
yeah,
the 4 hours. It's the subsequent 60 to 90 days.
yeah.
You have to design the whole picture.
And so one of the things that you talked about there briefly, but is one of my favorite things that's happening in organizations is gamification. I personally feel like if in the next 30 years everything in business gets gamified, I'm in. Like,
Yeah.
I just sign me up completely. As you know, like my real jam is talent ac, and that's my space, and I love it. And there is a movement finally in terms of candidate experience to gamify the application process. And that within that you can incorporate a lot of skill assessment and personality, you know, alignment metrics and all of that. And I think that that is the most interesting and exciting thing that is happening personally in this space, full stop, because everything else is just kind of new versions of doing the same thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think that this is something that is genuinely new. And that's super exciting to me. Talk to me about gamification of training for you guys, and how is that working? And are you as excited about it as me? Am I the only nerd here? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great tool. I mean, it really works well if it's something that's, oh, like the training projects, just to be honest, that I hate the most are like, we're rolling out a new system to the whole company. And it's like, oh, you know, those are like, you know, that when we, you know, those are like usually there's no winning.
no.
Everyone's going to be upset about the change. There's never enough change management, and they take it all out on the training. So that, you know, projects like that, you know, we had this new revenue reporting standard we had to adhere to and train the whole finance department on like a year or two ago. And there was a new system that we had, like, I don't know, HCL or some vendor developed for us. So this whole thing was attached to like an agile, you know, platform development at the same time. So we couldn't really like train them at the exact time. So one, it's kind of dry content.
Yeah, super
It's a
dry.
new system. It's a lot of change. We're asking people who are already maxed out to use a new system and learn a new system. So,
It's about
but
money and numbers, which
yeah,
nobody like. That's that's the thing that you push off
yeah,
to the end of the month because nobody wants to do it
yeah.
anyway. Yeah.
So, you know, and usually it's like, oh, great, a new process, you know, let's highlight the efficiencies that it's driving. Well, it's not really driving any efficiencies. It's going to take, I'm like, oh, come on, help us out here. So anyways, we ended up developing a mobile game. So our problem was, look, we've got to train it earlier than they're going to be able to use it because of the agile release cycle they're doing with the software. So we need to keep it fresh in their minds for like a month or two. So we came up with using this mobile game that was kind of like Candy Crush, and except it would throw like questions at you about the training, and there was a
Nice.
whole leaderboard and everything. And then so we kind of started that, and that people were really getting into that, but we noticed there was only like 50% participation. And it was funny, we're having like VPs, doing this mobile game, competing against each other on
yeah.
the leaderboard. And leaderboard was very public. And but then we got the finance VP to throw money in, like essentially like I think it was
Top 5 on the leaderboard.
$500 gift cards or something. Yeah, and the top
Nice.
people on the leaderboard got gift cards. Oh my gosh, it just took off like wildfire at that point.
Nice.
And we did like in some A/B testing, we did a control group that wasn't involved because this was our first time kind of using this type of gamification, and the statistical significance was huge. The gamification had like an 80% higher knowledge retention, and I think like 60 or 70% better application on the job than the control group that didn't get it. So because
Poor
we
control
were like,
group.
yeah.
Did they at least get some kind of a gift card? Because I feel like it's not fair being the control group who didn't get to compete. Like that, I call BS on behalf of the control group.
Yeah, I mean they were given like a gift at the end, yeah. So because
like
they were unable to participate in yeah, but it was great because it, this is our one, and this happens in learning all the time. You get one shot to prove a technology that you've got initial funding for. So that enabled us, this is kind of the part my team comes in of like, hey, we need to prove the effectiveness of this platform. So we set all that up so that we could come out of there with a solid ROI and say, yeah, this, using this kind of gamification platform, results in, we know it's going to result in higher retention when we have this kind of scenario, and it enabled us to keep licensing that software. So
was it a software tool that was already had like some sort of an AI in there that you could put in the parameters that you were trying to do, and then it would just like, and here's a game for you? So it's not like you're contracting with some game developer to be like, hey, friend,
yeah, it was from a popular company called eLearning Brothers. I think their product is called Training Arcade, and they have a bunch of different games, and you pick one and you kind of customize it to your to your program. Yeah. So
that is so cool. So have you now gotten to do that more times?
Yeah, we've used it, and it comes in handy for these software releases, so which are always kind of challenging to keep people excited about. And other gamification, we have some big code of conduct and ethics training are extremely important in a pharmaceutical company. So we do some gamification, like some badging type things for some of those programs, like an Olympics type thing, where you get like a departments based on how quickly they achieve compliance, get like a gold, silver, bronze, and then they get like a pizza party or something. I don't know what they're doing this past year. Of course, there's no pizza parties happening, but
I mean, there could be just a whole bunch of little mini pizza parties. Right. I have my husband's company for Christmas this year in the UK through this like giant Christmas party that was like 4 hours on Zoom. They had a DJ who spent the whole time going on the Zoom camera, like I can't, however much they paid that DJ, it was not enough to have that job of just sitting there. So, I mean, maybe it's that. Maybe you guys are having Zoom discotheques all over. That would be a fascinating choice.
Well, we're starting the planning for this year's version of that program, so I'm sure they'll come up with something. Training people are super creative, so. Yes.
And so I've always been one of those. I know you're surprised to hear that I was in the crazy, like, and I always found that as a trainer, one of the things that I had to push against with my fellow collaborators was that people would have like, oh my God, I had this great idea. If we did this activity, that would really teach people this thing. And I was like, I feel your enthusiasm, and yay for enthusiasm. But also maybe, and this is just me spitballing here, maybe we start with objectives for the class, and then we work on activities that achieve that objective, not just activities that we think might be an interesting moral lesson for people in the greater world.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like you're on sort of the extreme end of the analytics. Me and my fellow trainers, I think, probably would have made your head explode. That we probably could have done with a little more Ryan in our cohort.
Well, I mean, engagement is extremely important. So keeping people's energy up, we've been able to prove in-person sessions, icebreakers having a huge impact. So, research shows that if your learners are engaged and happy, they learn more during your session.
Yeah.
So all of that stuff, it's great. And I used to like developing activities as well back when I was a instructional designer. So, it's all that matters, like getting people up out of their chair, moving, keeping that level of engagement up throughout the session. And we measure that. We go ask, we ask people, how much they felt they were engaged. We have some virtual platforms that actually measure engagement, like Adobe Connect has an algorithm that scores people each minute. It knows if the training window is not your active window. It knows if you've minimized it. It knows if you've got your camera off, if you haven't said anything. The longer that you don't say anything to your microphone, your points go down.
Oh my God.
And then we get a whole data output of that from that session. So, we can go in on our Adobe Connect sessions and actually say, this session had this % average engagement versus this session. And then, when you look at that in the aggregate over dozens of sessions and align it with instructors and combine that with the survey data, you can start to triangulate on, where you have engagement challenges. Or, wow, they're off the charts over here. What are they doing? Let's replicate that. So.
Wow. All of that. Yeah. So I feel like that's a deep rabbit hole that we've gone down on my own nerding. So I'm going to just pull it back a little bit.
Sure thing.
One of the things I want to talk about is diversity and inclusion is huge right now. And one of the interesting, I always think, statistics about HR that include the big umbrella, so including L&D, Talent Act, all of that, is that it is majoritarily female until you get to the director and above level, at which point it abruptly switches and once again becomes majoritarily male. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, I'm in a learning space which is predominantly female, even in leadership. But, I mean, this has been studied so much in the past few years. And, in the UK for global companies, we have, in the UK, we have to be measuring and reporting out on, our gender diversification and our pay equity, gaps and things like that. So, I'm proud that PPD is actually doing very well. Our company is 76% female, and
which is amazing for science.
Yeah, and as you go up, I think at the VP level it's like 50-50, which is amazing.
Yes.
And I'm very proud of that. So, and part of it,
PPD is an outlier. Why?
Yeah, well, I mean, clinical research tends to lean more female. It gets a lot of people, I think, with nursing and clinical type backgrounds, which are heavily female. But part of it, I think, is it attracts people who are very mission oriented on improving health and just generally caring for public health. A lot of people, I come from the cutthroat tech sectors. It's been kind of a refreshing, breath of fresh air for me, where there's so many people I work with where their intrinsic motivation for working is the outcome of what we do. It's not their salary, right? It's not their position. Their first thing they come to work for every day is they believe that they're helping improve public health across the world. And, I think that also, there's a gender offset on that as well. So yeah, I mean, in learning, I think as you go up through the levels, you do see a lot more women involved because learning tends to lean that way. But really, I think it goes back to implicit bias. I have a psychology background and I'm a big IO psych nerd, and implicit bias is very, very strong. And even though I'm, being married to an anthropologist and a hardcore feminist, um, I when I had, when I had two daughters, and my first daughter, so even being ultra aware and as objective as I can, and being kind of trained to be an objective social scientist, I found my own implicit biases with my daughter all the time. Just like, calling inanimate objects he, right?
Mm-hmm.
When it's neither. It's an inanimate object, like when I was watching Wall-E and they've put gender, they've ascribed gender to robots, I mean, come on. So I think it's that implicit bias that runs so deep. And when you get into like executive situations, women are interrupted more. Women are not given as much, if you're in a boardroom setting and, there's women and men wanting to interject, men get the floor. I've seen it happen all the time in my career. And even in an environment where people try to be very aware of it. And that's really what it comes down to. I used to work for a great VP, and she talked about that. She went to a South by Southwest talk on this, and she's like, I didn't really think about it until I went to this talk. And then when I went back to work the next day, especially on conference calls, how apparent that was, where, I'm interrupted more, I'm talked over, and also just there's like an implicit bias. If you are a tall male, people listen to you more. And
you're in charge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to be honest, with a training background, like, and being 6 feet tall, white male, I mean, just completely transparent here. Yeah, I can come in and just own a boardroom. So the number one thing I try to do is just give the floor to the women in the room. If I'm presenting to a room full of executives, and there's female executives sitting there, I will defer to them for questions first, right? So those are the types of things that I try to do. But I think corporations all need to be doing extensive implicit bias training. I'm pushing that, as much as I can where I'm at. But I think that they're starting to do that, in police departments and stuff for racial bias. But I think implicit bias training for gender, for racial, for all different types of categories is what's needed to help people, grow beyond that, and just to be aware of it.
So I'm a big implicit bias nerd as well. My master's is in queer theory, and it was about exactly that. My master's work was on implicit bias in language, about feminine and masculine. So I feel you 1,000% there. And one of the things I think was really interesting, I heard recently, some of the most effective buy-in moment for implicit bias training in police officers was to step away from using race, but instead to use women. And so they've been doing scenarios where they come in, there's a woman holding a gun, and they are like, oh, they all like holstered their weapons, and we're like, ma'am, are you okay? And then she turns and shoots them, because their implicit bias assumes that the woman is the victim. And then from the study that I heard, like, that was really eye-opening, that, oh my God, you're right. Clearly I do have things that I assume. And that once they had recognized that, they were able to engage with that training. And I think that everything in the implicit bias area is so interesting. and so complicated and hard. Like, it is the most difficult thing to overcome. Again, I'm hyper aware, and yet I catch myself doing it too. I have two boys, so we have the exact opposite
Yeah.
problem. And my boys are in a loving all things tutu and pretty dresses phase. They really like to swish in pretty dresses. And when they first announced that they wanted a pretty dress, my husband, who is a very enlightened guy, was like, and then he was like, and then I breathed, and I was like, it's just clothes. And he said, intellectually, I know that I don't have a problem with that, but there is just this implicit thing inside me that goes, if my kid wears a dress, people are going to pick on him. And that's not okay. He said, it wasn't that I had a problem with a boy in a dress. It was that my immediate thing was, I can't let him do that because what will people say around it? But it's all tangled up in there, which is just, even trying to help him unravel it. I can't imagine trying to work with an entire, police force or workforce to help them unravel it.
And it's tough. A lot of people don't want to admit that they are getting, they just don't want to admit that of privilege, right? They don't want to acknowledge that. Like, that's the first step. I love the activities where it's like, you get like a trainer or somebody that says they walk across the room or outside works best, like a field, and they say, look, I've got, $500 cash in my hand, and we're going to race. You guys are going to race. First person to grab this out of my hand gets the cash. But I'm going to ask you a series of questions first. And if you can answer yes to any of these questions, you take a step forward. And all the questions are like privilege related.
Yeah. I've seen those videos. Yeah. I love that exercise.
So, and that's something that's, I think, eye-opening for a lot of people to understand privilege. And then I think once, you can understand privilege, and you can accept that for yourself, that part of where you've gotten into the position you have is simply because, of your privilege, then I think it's a little bit easier to start to be more aware of your implicit bias.
So I want to go back to something you said earlier that I thought was really interesting. You said that the majority of the people that you work with are not just there for the paycheck, but that they really genuinely think that PPD is going to heal the world. Mm-hmm. How do you guys psychologically as an organization balance that with the media and pop culture evil big pharma trope that we keep hearing over and over again?
Well, big pharma are our clients. So our job is, we're a clinical research organization. So our job is to, once they have a patent, we get it through approval. We do the human trials. And so our job really is to make sure that all of the regulatory requirements are met in the testing, all the data is valid and ethically collected, and everything goes through independent review boards and everything to get through the approval process. And this is made the headlines a lot as they've expedited it a bit for COVID vaccines, but it's extremely important process, and it has a really long history in what they call good clinical practices. So our job is to make sure that we get that effective drugs that are actually effective make it to market that protect human safety. Our part of it is a little bit easier to contend with. There are some antics with many of the big companies, but from our perspective, we're constantly working on all these amazing studies, vaccines that are going to save, it's funny, like COVID is so small compared to all the other things that comes through our doors, right? Oncology treatments and medications and chemotherapies and all kinds of vaccines that, like the dengue fever vaccines, which are going to save like 1 million people a year, things like that. So, um, and COVID, of course, it's public knowledge that PPD executed the trials for the Moderna vaccine. So we did I think the phase 2 and 3 trials for that. So that's just an example of something that has just a huge impact on the world. And, we oversaw making sure that it was tested appropriately and it's going to be safe. So
I think that one of the things that's been interesting for me as a learning point as a white woman in COVID, I did not realize, I was aware of the historical ill treatment of racial minorities with regards to these kind of trials, but I was not aware that that has knock-on effects on modern populations and that there's an ongoing mistrust, which it's one of the, for me, that was one of those well done, Michelle, kind of light bulb moments of all this. And I felt really dumb for not having realized there's definitely something that I learned. What, if anything, do you think organizations like PPD, though not necessarily them specifically, need to do to fix that and to heal that wound and bring people back in?
I think probably just better communication. I mean, we are our biggest challenge is getting patients, right, for trials. You'd be surprised how hard it is, even when you get to phase 3 and you actually have real patients in need that need this therapy, and it's hard to find them and to connect them with the trial. And what makes it even harder is, matching the demographics of your enrolled patients with the demographics of your population. For the COVID vaccine, for example, the NIH-led studies for the Moderna vaccine, Pfizer did their own thing, but their challenge was, look, the trial subjects has to match the United States population, the demographics. So, and we were able to achieve that. Our AES group did a great job with that. So I think that that's making that more transparent to patients. I think transparency to patients is the number one thing. I have my own personal example after learning about this entire industry coming to PPD. We in the United States, anyways, we have a lot of vaccines you give your children, and they want to give them all at one time. Here's those 4 shots, 2 in each leg, and you're done, right? And all these combo shots, but there's actually several different brands. All the big pharma companies to have their own version of like the DTaP vaccine, right? And they all have their own pros and cons and likelihood of adverse effects, and all that data is public, but nobody is communicating that to parents and to patients. Same thing with like shingles vaccine. Like people in their 60s right now are being told you need Prevnar 13 and you need to get the shingles vaccine, and but they're not educating them on all the information out there that went into testing it, proving that it's effective. Any drug or vaccine or anything you take, you can go Google the drug name, FDA insert, and you'll find all the FDA published information for that trial, and you can go see all the people that it was tested on.
I'm going to push back to you on that a little bit, Ryan, because that is dense information. Like, I'm a fairly bright, well-educated woman, and I struggle to get through some of that. When we're talking about people who, through circumstance, choice, and institutional racism and everything else, are in a position of not as much disposable time, not necessarily access to the internet, and lower educational standards that make it harder to penetrate that kind of literature. I mean, I feel like that's not really a realistic standard.
As a good Democratic libertarian, I like to label myself, I'm all for just transparency. When you get a vaccine, you get a sheet that's governed by the CDC about that vaccine, right? But it needs more information, and it needs it even, have you ever, like, if you get name brand cereal at the store, you notice they put, like, aside from the nutrition label, they by law have to put the key nutrition indicators, I like to call them, K and I's, across the top, how much sugar it has, so on and so forth, right across the top. It's all about just simplifying that and making it, that transparency easier for consumers. And we are consumers of medicines. And right now, a lot of that is, it's like, well, just trust your doctor, and your doctor hasn't even read the FDA insert usually. So I think what needs to happen is more transparency, and that information needs to be simplified and streamlined so that it's easy to understand, easy to digest, just like we've done over the past 50 years with nutrition. That's a great use case, I think. And it enables consumers to make great decisions with very little investment. We need the same thing for medicines, in my opinion.
Okay, so what I heard is we need a crib sheet for anything that you ever take that makes it really like, if you take this, side effect, death potential, and so that people can really, in 5 seconds or less, just make a smart choice. I think, like, that
you see the commercials. It's like, it's a joke now.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Potential side effects include.
Potential side effects include everything, and but if you actually go read the FDA insert, each one of those has a likelihood, right, based on the trials. So there's a 0.00001% that you have death through diarrhea, right? Yeah, but it's like
officially.
So it's like, but you're more likely just to have you're more likely to have maybe, you could actually have a 5 or 10% chance of getting a heart arrhythmia, right? So they're all mixed together in the advertisement, and it makes you kind of dismiss it all together. But the data is there, and we need to make that easier to digest, to your point, for the people taking those drugs. And I think that that's really the challenge and companies aren't going to do that themselves. We need leadership within our governing bodies, just like we did with food labeling, to do that with drug labeling. So
let's talk about ease of access of information in a slightly different context. You're a hiring manager.
Mm-hmm.
You see resumes, etc. I don't know if you heard, working for PPD, but there's a pandemic out there, and so there's a lot of people in the job market. So my guess is that right now you have a glut of candidates for any position that your team has available. When you see these scores of resumes that cross your computer screen, what for you right now at this moment in time, when you're looking at them, I would think that you look at them probably a little differently than maybe you have at other times. My experience of hiring managers from many years of doing this is that the more candidates they have, the less time they have to look at each one. So their preferences on what they're looking for change in those moments. That when you only have 2, suddenly they care about that Oxford comma on page 3. Other days they do not.
Wow, yeah. I mean, to be honest, I spend about 30 seconds looking at a resume, because if I get a stack of them, like I'll get, virtually, right, I'll get, 15 attachments on an email, or we use, Oracle, there'll just be a whole row of them on the screen. So yeah, my first pass is like 30 seconds.
And that's as a hiring manager, which is like that's a recruiter kind of zone there, right? That's not the place you want to be.
Well,
don't advertise that.
It's a big part of my process, because especially for the area that I hire in, more your resume or CV for me is more about, there's the things you check real quick just to glance. Okay, yeah, education, breadth of experience, what's their latest job, but more it's how are they presenting this information to me. I'm usually hiring for analytics people, right?
Yeah.
Or training people, and how you communicate on that page is 99% of your interview right there, because I'm hiring you to communicate to stuff on a page to people effectively. So that's kind of where it starts for me. Like if it is dense or not laid out well, or is just not, it's just a wall of words, or it's just, you know, for each job, it's just this long narrative, right?
List upon list of every
Exactly.
responsibility they ever had.
I'm looking like for each job I scan real quick, I'm looking at like, what did you do and so what? What did
Yeah.
you do and what did that result in? Right. And the faster I can absorb that information, the more I lean into that candidate, right? They make my second pass stack. So
I can't tell you how much time I spend trying to convince clients that having a badly formatted resume, never mind the bad writing that goes
right.
into it, but just the bad format, the harder you make it to figure out who you are you any good, and what is the context for your experience. So, okay, you've worked in L&D for 10 years. There's a big difference between delivering training at, a 50-person company and your training is the onboarding,
Yeah.
and I am senior technical trainer at Google for 5.
Yeah.
Like, they're just no comparing those two
Yeah.
jobs, really. They have the same title, they're roughly in the same sphere, but there's just nothing on that level. I remember with the company I worked for in the UK, we went from having an expectation of training about 30 to 40 people a month, which felt like we were really doing a lot, to having an I know, don't laugh at me. To having an expectation of doing like 250 a month.
That's
And
a good number.
live and in-person training.
Mm-hmm.
And these were like 4-hour classes that we were teaching. So it was a lot. And we were just like, that's impossible. No one alive could do those numbers. And I think it really taught me a lot about the need for those numbers and that context, because you have people who are like, oh, I've taught exactly this before. Why am I not getting the interview? Well, I mean, if I can't figure out that you taught exactly this before at a place that is comparable to where you're applying now, then that's why you're not getting it. So I think that is reassuring to me to know that is your takeaway on that as well.
Yeah, and it's kind of, and then once I narrow that stack down, that first pass, then I take a little bit of a closer look. But really I kind of save that thorough review for the interview. I like to just get people in interviews as fast as I can, right? In a lot of the talent markets around the world, I unfortunately haven't been hiring in the US a lot recently, but like in Bulgaria and Manila and India, man, you lose people like that.
Yeah.
Right. So, it's all about just like acting quickly, and getting people into an interview. And that's where like all of my hiring really goes into the interview. And then I more thoroughly go right before the interview. Usually I'll block off on my calendar like 15 minutes to thoroughly go through their CV, make notes. I'm going to ask them about that and about that, right? Or I'm going to ask them generally a situational question, and they better bring up something from here, right? From that job, right? That's what I'm looking for. So I think that that's where kind of yeah, I'd say a resume has 3 stages for me, right? That first pass, then I usually sort that deck a second time, and then those people go to interviews, and I'm very thorough on it right before the interview.
That's when we care about the Oxford comma. Yep. Is the
well.
I joke, but
Yeah.
I have actually known hiring managers to reject people over comma placement, and
not me. Maybe if I'm hiring an editor, but I'm not perfect myself. I'm no editor level, so I have an editor review my resume. But yeah, have an editor review your resume. Have a professional service like yours, help you with your resume and your LinkedIn. And some of my former peers and colleagues, and even some of my mentors. I have one mentor, she's amazing, but she was kind of out of looking for a job. She had not really done that in a long time. So yeah, she
Yeah,
hired someone to do her LinkedIn. She
yeah,
didn't have
absolutely.
one before. And it's amazing. It's like I need mine like that,
We'll talk later. But yeah, and I think that for the other thing is, especially when you hire in other markets, you know, when you're hiring non-native speakers to work in an English environment,
Yeah.
there's a huge difference between spoken English and written business English. And
Right.
there are people who are fine in a spoken English context. Like that is not a concern. And yes, they are verbally fluent, but man, does their written English suck. And it's just a terrible first impression on that resume. And it always makes me really sad for them. And it's such a delicate thing to have to feedback like, friend, you're saying you're fluent in English. This resume does not reflect
Right.
somebody who speaks really great English. And so I think that, that's another, I would think that that would be a challenge for you as well, hiring in global markets, that you probably have to have a lot of different tolerances for that, and understanding that this is not their first language. And so you have to deal with that.
Usually that's not apparent on the resume by the time it gets to me, right? I usually, tell our recruiters I need good, we need really good communicators for this role. But I'm often surprised when we get to the interview. They've passed through recruiting. Their resume looks great. Everything they've given us looks great. And then, they're having to live translate in their head when I'm putting them on the spot with an interview question. And that's kind of where it kind of goes south. Often is sometimes I'll even try some idioms to see if they're how fluent they are in that. So that's more for me is like the challenge is more in Eastern Europe for me,
Mm-hmm.
um, or maybe Japan or China. In China, it's like the opposite. Their written English is very good, but when you get on the phone, verbally is harder, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot harder for them. So yeah, it really just depends on the region. And you go to like the Philippines. We do a lot of I have a big team there. They're so American. They can even imitate our accents, and it's like, it's like the complete other, opposite from China, right? Their spoken English is very good. So yeah, it's depends on where you're hiring, and yeah, for me, it often comes up in the interview. So.
That makes sense. So is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to make sure that we do cover, that you had definitely wanted to talk about?
Um, you know, I really am just here to share, my experience. I think
Which you
that
have done beautifully, by the way. Thank you.
I think that my career has been pretty linear, right? So I can't share how to handle certain types of events in your career, but I'd say the one thing that I have done that might, be something a lot of people are facing right now is just taking a big leap to another job. When you're in a good job, you're secure, maybe you've been at a company for a long time,
12 years,
and
for example,
yeah,
with a big
and
tech company.
you decide, I'm going to go to another industry and I'm just going to completely try something new. And I think that that's probably the best thing that I've ever done. I could have stayed where I was and continued to move forward there. But I think getting and it's affected me so much that I actually consider that in my hiring now. You know,
Okay.
I kind of lean more towards people who have maybe spent 5 to 7 years and have experience in a couple of different industries versus someone who's been at a company for 20 years, right?
Okay.
So I kind of now lean more towards that because, you get that diversity in leadership styles, you get that diversity in, corporate processes, and I think that's important. Now, I still think it's bad when I see the job hopper. They've got a
Mm-hmm.
new job every year, every 2 years. that, I kind of recoil at that a little bit. But I think like that 5-year mark, 7-year mark,
Get
it
out, stretch your legs, do something
yeah,
new.
try something new. Absolutely. I'm gonna have to challenge myself with that pretty
Let's
soon.
say,
But
what comes next for you? I mean, where do you
um,
go from here?
I've got the young kids right now, so like I'm just treading water. It's tough for me to like I'm one of those people I like to just my whole career has been at 150% and I'm like trying to make 100% right now. So but it's just the stage of the life I'm at. So I'm kind of sitting still for now, developing in place, I like to call it. But yeah, as the kids get older, and we're more mobile again, um, you know, we'll see where the state of my industry's at, where I probably could see myself maybe going back to technology again, or maybe trying some new sector.
You
I'm
had
more
to.
attracted now after being at PPD. I think there's a long future for me at PPD, but after being at PPD, I'm really now into the mission-oriented companies now. So I could see myself, the thing that would probably pull me away from PPD would be just a opportunity, an amazing opportunity or role that I see at a company that I really respect that I think is doing a lot of good in the world. So that's
Green
probably,
technology
yeah.
or nonprofits with an actual budget.
I don't know. I think there was a point in my career where I absolutely wanted to go work at a giant nonprofit like the Red Cross, but Um, I, I need a little bit more to support my family now. I'll just put it that way.
I completely understand, having dabbled in the nonprofit
Can you
world.
imagine how much college is going to cost for our kids, right?
Oh,
It's going to be
forget about
insane.
it. No, my kids are going to trade school, Ryan. They're going to both be plumbers. That's the plan.
Hey,
Plumbers and tutus. That's where
I
we're
think that's
going.
amazing. Yeah, I know plumbers that make more than I do. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
So you would get your girls to be mechanics and my boys to be plumbers that can like form a company together. I can see it already.
yes. So yeah, I mean, I think, but yeah, maybe later in life, I don't think I'll ever be able to retire. So probably, moving into nonprofit sector then, or maybe into academia. Eventually someday, go get a PhD,
Harvard, if you're
once I have
listening,
time for
this is
that.
Lily's
So,
talk.
but yeah, I think that, that's probably, my long term future. But in the meantime, definitely continue to expand my breadth of leadership and, moving into the, senior director roles, executive director, vice president, probably next 10 years is the direction I'm heading. I definitely, PPD is fantastic about that, about having lots of career growth opportunities. So, but of course, sometimes as the higher you get, the more this, I have to remind people all the time, the higher you get and the further you get in the career, the longer it takes to get to the next level. You
And
know?
the fewer options there are
Yes,
there. Like there are
exactly.
fewer
Yeah,
VPs than there are directors. So
absolutely. So you're just fighting the odds at some point. And
you just got to out
uh,
survive the guy next
yeah,
to you.
so it's that classic curve that just kind of exponentially shoots up with, if this is time and this is effort, it goes like that, right? So the higher you get, the further in your career you get, it slows down dramatically. So and that so yeah, I mean, I think that, yeah, 10 years I could maybe see two increases by then, right? So that's just kind of where we're at as we're getting old, Michelle.
Why would you say that to me, Ryan? I thought we were friends. But yes, we are technically getting old. Um, on that bombshell, I'm going to say thank you for your time. We will have links to you in the show notes, and any other links that you would like us to add there. I really can't thank you enough. It has been fascinating and just a super nerdy treat for me. So Thank you very, very much for joining us, and have a great evening.
Yeah, you too, and happy to contribute. And anybody, I'm sure you'll share my LinkedIn. I'm a big advocate of sharing best practices and just talking to random professionals. That's why COVID has been killing me without my conference circuit. But so yeah, anybody who wants to reach out to me with questions about my background or anything we've talked about, I definitely encourage you to do so.
Fantastic. Thank you.
All right. Have a good one.
You've been listening to Hey, I Want Your Job.
For more on how you can get your own awesome job, visit O&H Consulting at www.onhconsulting.com. We offer incredible resumes, no-nonsense career advice, and real-world tips for landing a job in today's market. Check us out on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram for more insider info. Soon you'll be hearing us say,
I'm Morgan McBride, and I want your job.
and I'm Lydia Lunning, and I want your job.
And I'm Michelle Olivier, and hey, I want your job.